Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special mock draft edition of Off Your Gord. Today is Tuesday, April the 8th, 2025. We're going to be talking about the NFL draft coming up. It's a big time of year, my favorite time of year, honestly, when it comes to sports. One of my favorite times of year. You know, the NFL draft is always exciting. You're going to see the future of the league kind of brought into the league this year. It's something that I look forward to every year. We've got, it takes place in Green Bay, Wisconsin this year, April the 24th on a Thursday, ending Saturday, April the 26th. As always, there's going to be a lot of draft day mania as teams kind of frenzy to get the players they want. There's going to be a lot of trades. But to set some ground rules for today's mock draft, even though we're going to see those trades in the first round, my mock draft is going to be completely trade-free. The goal here isn't really to show which teams I think are going to trade for who and all these transactions that we're going to see on draft day. That's not really what my goal is when it comes to doing a mock draft. I usually just do it to kind of, explain what I think teams need. I'm sure there's going to be some reaches in my draft. I'm going to have a bit of hot takes here and there, but, every NFL draft, especially in the first round, always has one or two reaches, so I don't think that's too big of an issue. As always, you can feel free to voice your opinions if you think I'm incorrect, but with that, let's get right into it. First overall, I think this is a pretty easy selection. I think, there's still a bit of, will they go with Cam Ward or will they go with somebody else? I think it's Cam Ward. The Titans need a quarterback. I feel like my entire life, with the exception of those pretty good Ryan Tannehill years, and maybe those like a couple of good Marcus Mariota years, the Titans have pretty much been at a quarterback drought my entire life. I was born in 2004, and they haven't really had good quarterback play for many of those years since then. I think the Titans are going to draft Miami standout quarterback Cam Ward first overall. He had a great season for Miami last year, transferring into Miami, and he immediately lit it up. Miami had one of the best offenses in college football last year. And, Cam Ward, the top two quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, I think couldn't be really more different from one another. Cam Ward's a lot more, running around, making plays with his legs, throwing off platform. And he's a lot more even keel. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I think he's a great leader. Shedeur Sanders, I have my questions about, his leadership and things like that, but he's a lot more of a pocket guy, not making as many plays with his legs, but a lot more accurate than Cam Ward, I would say. But I think the Titans are going to go with Cam Ward. He seems to be the guy that they've been looking at for a while now, and I think they're gonna pull the trigger and make the selection, and they're gonna pick him first overall. Coming in at number 2, I think the Cleveland Browns, I think they need to make the easy choice here. You want to say, will they go pass rusher to put a guy next to Myles Garrett? Even though the Deshaun Watson tenure in Cleveland has been a disaster, will they go with Deshaun Watson's replacement rather, and pick Shedeur Sanders? I don't think that's the case. I think they need to make the easy choice here and go with Travis Hunter. He's a wide receiver / cornerback from Colorado. He's had an incredible rise in college football. I think a lot of people didn't really take Colorado as a threat when Deion first got there, and they started off strong and then kind of fell off pretty quickly. But last year, they showed so much improvement, and Travis Hunter had one of the most impressive collegiate seasons I've ever seen, winning the Heisman. The question is now, I guess, which do the Browns use him at? Do they put him at wide receiver? They kind of need a wide receiver. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy had an incredible year last year. His first year as a Brown, he lit it up. But I think they kind of need somebody to play opposite him. And as far as corners go, they don't really need one. They've got Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome, who have both been incredible players for Cleveland. I don't think they need a corner, so I think they're going to draft Travis Hunter, and I think they're going to play him at wide receiver. Maybe down the line we see him switch to corner, like during his career. I could see that happening, but I think as far as his start to his NFL career goes, he'll start at wide receiver. Number 3, I think a lot of people have the Giants penciled in for taking either a quarterback or Abdul Carter. I don't think the Giants are going to draft a quarterback because the Giants are in a weird spot. I think they've kept kind of the core of the staff that they have, and they're on potentially the shortest leash I've ever seen heading into a season. They know that they need to win some games. I'm not saying they need to make the playoffs right away, but they've signed Russell Wilson, and I think they're literally in a you need to show some improvement or else everybody's getting fired mode. Brian Dable, short leash. General manager, short leash. Everybody's on a short leash in that building, and they need to hit right away. And the way you hit right away is protecting the quarterback. They've already got a good pass rush. They don't need more. They don't need a quarterback because you're going to have at least Russell Wilson. He's going to provide a little bit of stability. You don't need another quarterback to be sitting behind him. That's not going to help you win right away. What is going to help you win right away is protecting Russell Wilson. So I think the Giants are going to draft Will Campbell, tackle out of LSU, 3rd overall. You need to protect the quarterback. They hit a home run on Andrew Thomas, but he missed pretty much all of last season due to injury. I would draft Will Campbell and have him play across from Andrew Thomas, and that's a match made in heaven if you ask me. Number 4. The Patriots are in an awesome spot. They've been terrible these last few years, but I see a real uptick coming for New England. Drake May impressed as a rookie. You've now got the coach figured out again. Mike Vrabel's a proven winner in the NFL. Gerard Mayo's tenure, unfortunately, didn't go so well for the Patriots, but they've made some great free agency signings. They finally spent money. I feel like my entire life during the Bill Belichick tenure, the Patriots would never really be ones to spend money in the offseason, but they've finally spent a bunch of money. They went out and got Stephon Diggs. They went out and got Carlton Davis, and as well as a few other players. And I think they're going to bolster their pass rush and get somebody that can rack up a ton of sacks as a rookie right away. That's Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State. He's a big-time player. I think he goes to New England and makes an immediate impact right away. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs next year just because they've been so hilariously bad these last couple of years, but I think they'll come close. I think we're going to see a big rise in win total out of New England next year. Number 5, the Jaguars. They're in kind of a weird spot as well. You know, they've been terrible, and I feel like, you know, the Doug Peterson tenure in Jacksonville started out really hot. They made the playoffs and they won a playoff game. They beat the Chargers, and it just went downhill pretty quickly. Trevor Lawrence looks completely lost out there, and they need to figure it out quick. They brought in Liam Cohen, who had an incredibly productive year with Baker Mayfield last year as offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they look to kind of get some of that production for Trevor Lawrence that the Buccaneers saw from Baker Mayfield last year with Cohen now as their head coach. And I think to help out Trevor Lawrence, they're going to draft a wide receiver, Tetairoa McMillan. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Wide receiver out of Arizona seems to be the pick here for me. They need a wide receiver badly. He's easily the best one in the draft, and I think that's a pretty good match there. Number 6, I think a lot of people, clicking onto this video and watching were wondering when he would show up, and I think Pete Carroll is going to get, for the Raiders, he's going to go and get his Marshawn Lynch. The Raiders need a running back badly. Ever since Josh Jacobs left, there's definitely been a noticeable hole there at running back, and they need to fill that in some way, and what better way to do it than one of the best college football running backs I have ever seen. Ashton Genty had an incredible year for Boise State. He's a running back out of Boise State. The Raiders need a running back. Pete Carroll has, he was the head coach for all those great Marshawn Lynch years with the Seahawks, and I think he wants to find his new Marshawn Lynch to kind of take some of the pressure off Geno Smith, who's their new quarterback. Coming in at number 7, Aaron Rodgers isn't there anymore, but he was getting killed a little bit by the offensive line. It was a little bit better last year than the offensive line was in 2023, but the Jets, even though they have a lot more mobile of a quarterback with Justin Fields, I think they really need to work on their offensive line still. And that's why I think they're going to be drafting the tackle out of Missouri, Armand Membo. They've got Olu Fashanu. He's going to be going into his second year, first full-time year as starter. Look for him to make a big jump. What better than to have Membo play opposite him on the other side? I think that's a pretty good match there. Coming in at number 8, the Panthers' defense last year was one of the worst I've seen in, frankly, ever. The team as a whole, including the defense, definitely showed some improvement towards the end of the season last year, but they got ran all over last year. The pass defense was okay, especially when you have guys like J.C. Horn in the secondary, but their rush defense was was awful, god awful. And I think a great way to remedy that is star defensive lineman Mason Graham out of Michigan. He might be my favorite defensive player in the draft. I loved Abdul Carter, but I have some injury concerns about Abdul. He missed some important workouts with his injuries, and I have a little bit of concern there. And Mason Graham is just a force to be reckoned with on the interior. He might be my favorite player completely total in this draft. I love Travis Hunter, but Mason Graham is a beast. I think for the Panthers, he's going to make an impact if they choose to draft him, which I think they should. Coming in at number 9, I think a lot of people were wondering when this card was going to fall. The Saints may not be showing their hand that they need a quarterback. And listen, Derek Carr has had some good years, especially even with the Saints. He's had some pretty solid performances and good seasons. But Derek Carr is, in my opinion, a below-average quarterback, and you can definitely do better. And they need to take a big swing. You've got the quarterback, an offensive-minded head coach, Kellen Moore. Or you got to get the quarterback figured out now that you've got the coach figured out. And I think the Saints are going to be drafting Shedeur Sanders, quarterback out of Colorado, 9th overall. I think, it'll be a bit of a rocky road to start, but luckily they won't need to play him right away. If they do decide to pick him, they could sit behind Derek Carr for a little while, maybe even a couple of years, and eventually be ready to start sometime in the future. Coming in at number 10, the Bears have had an incredible offseason. They were a mess last year. Caleb Williams, their rookie quarterback, was getting killed, and he kind of saw a lot of negative coverage from both the fans and the media. I personally didn't see it as much. I thought he was, he wasn't as good as Bo Nix, and he wasn't as good as Jaden Daniels, but those were two of the best rookie quarterbacks we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. Caleb Williams, he threw 20 touchdowns, which is, you wouldn't think it, but it's actually pretty rare when it comes to rookie quarterbacks. You don't really see them break that 20 touchdown threshold, but he did. They've signed a bunch of offensive linemen to get him better protected. He was getting killed last year, so that was a big step. They've made signings where they've needed to make signings. They got the head coach figured out. I think Ben Johnson's a great offensive-minded head coach. Only thing you really need to figure out now is the running back, and I know this is going to seem like a huge reach, but I think the Bears are going to reach a little bit and draft running back out of North Carolina, Omarion Hampton. He had a great year for North Carolina. Very rarely do you see nowadays two running backs go this highly in the first round, but I think, that's just the big glaring hole in Chicago right now. And, yes, you could see it as a reach because running backs don't go super high anymore, but if it fills a need, it fills a need. That's not a reach to me. Coming in at number 11, the 49ers, I think the writing was on the wall. Last season was a complete and utter disappointment. Coming off a Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs, I think a lot of people expected them to try and come back, if not win the thing. That didn't happen. They finished dead last in the NFC West. They were terrible. They had, granted a ton of injuries in key positions on the field. Because of those injuries, Brock Purdy took a step back. The narrative is that he's a bit of a game manager, but it's hard to manage a game when all of your star teammates are going down with injuries. He was one of the only people healthy. So I think they'll be improved this year. And they did lose a few key players, I guess you could call it. They did lose Charvarius Ward. That was a big loss. But I think the 49ers, you could see them be one of those teams where it's addition by subtraction. We could see a bit of a resurgence from them this year. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs, but I think it'll definitely be an improvement over last year. So at number 11, I have them drafting cornerback out of Texas, Jahdae Barron. Immediately filling that Charvarius Ward loss. He went to the Colts in the offseason, so I think they're immediately going to get a new cornerback to replace that. Number 12, the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of people have them drafting a wide receiver, but, Jerry Jones, as much as he's a flashy general manager and a flashy owner, at some point you got to kind of resign yourself. You can't be making these these crazy splash draft picks and signings. You just got to, make the right picks sometimes, and they need pass rush. You lost DeMarcus Lawrence to the Seahawks in free agency. Micah Parsons is frankly, that situation's a mess. He's, A, frankly not been as good the last few years as he was to start his career, but also B, this whole feud going on with him and his agent and Jerry Jones. You need a pass rush. I think out of Marshall, these Dallas Cowboys are going to be drafting Mike Green, edge rusher, 12th overall. Coming in at number 13, the Miami Dolphins. They need cornerback. They need secondary help in general. Losing a lot of their key secondary players in free agency and to retirement and things like that. I think they're going to be drafting cornerback out of Michigan. Sorry, not Missouri. Will Johnson. I think that fills a need for them right away. Coming in at number 14, the Indianapolis Colts. They are in a bit of a weird spot. I think they had, honestly, playoff anticipation and playoff hopes heading into last year. We didn't see that materialize, frankly, because Anthony Richardson wasn't very good, which was disappointing to me. I've been a big Anthony Richardson fan ever since the start of his career, and unfortunately, it didn't look like it was panning out last year. They're going to give him one more go at things to try and see if, this is his real prove-it year. They've signed some competition for him to kind of compete for the starting job and put some pressure on him. What better way to help him out than get him a weapon? Penn State's tight end Tyler Warren is the pick here for me at number 14. He had a great year for Penn State, playing for Drew Aller, who's a quarterback that I believe is going to have a fantastic year next year and become a first-round draft pick in his own right in 2026. But we're not talking about 26 right now. We're talking about 2025. And I think his number one tight end, Tyler Warren, is going to be going to the Indianapolis Colts and is going to be a new weapon for Anthony Richardson to utilize in hopefully maintaining the starting job in 2025. Coming in at number 15, part of me wanted to give the Atlanta Falcons a weapon here for brand new quarterback Michael Penix Jr. He started late in the season due to Kirk Cousins' frankly bad performances. And he impressed. He definitely impressed in some of his starts. He's got a few weapons. He's got the biggest one. He's got Bijan Robinson and he's got Drake London and Kyle Pitts, obviously. But part of me wanted to give him another one, but I think we're going to be going linebacker Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. He had an incredible year. The Falcons are in a spot where their defense is okay. The Falcons are just the epitome of okay. They need to make that next step in terms of one aspect of the ball, whether it's offense or defense, to make the playoffs. And I think a great way to do that would be to get linebacker Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. Coming in at number 16, the Arizona Cardinals are going to be drafting, in my opinion, one of my favorite players in the draft. I think if you asked scouts and people making mock drafts about this during the college football season and early in the season, he would have been a top 10, potentially top 5 pick. He has definitely fallen down the ranks a little bit, but I still think this is an incredible player. He's got all the measurables you could want in an offensive lineman. I'm going to say Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas, the offensive tackle, is the move here. Paris Johnson for the Cardinals has played great. I think Kelvin Banks playing across from him at that left tackle side would play amazing. One of my favorite prospects in this draft. I know that's a bit of a hot take considering how much he's fallen down the board, but I think he's going to be a great player. While we're talking about offensive tackles, the Cincinnati Bengals have needed one consistently. As much as I want to say they would go defense here, you've got to worry about offensive line. And unfortunately, they've lost a few of those offensive linemen in free agency, or some of them have just been not playing very well. They're going to draft Josh Simmons, tackle out of Ohio State. This is a pick that I wasn't super confident on, just because, as far as defense goes, they had one of the worst in the league last year, and they're only getting worse with the potential loss of Trey Hendrickson. But number 17, I'm going to say Josh Simmons, tackle out of Ohio State for the Bengals. Number 18, the Seahawks, Mike McDonald, very defensive-minded head coach. They've lost some offensive pieces in free agency, but they gained them back in free agency. You've got your new quarterback, Sam Darnold, and you've bolstered both sides of the ball, honestly, in free agency. They could go pretty much anything here, and I'd be okay with it, but I have them taking Donovan Ezeruaku. I believe I pronounced that right. He is an edge rusher out of Boston College, and he'll be a good addition to their defense. Leonard Williams had a great year last year. They've signed DeMarcus Lawrence. You've got pieces like that making an impact. I believe he fits right in. Coming in at number 19, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Had a great year last year. I think honestly a little bit disappointing compared to where they felt like they were worthy of. I think a lot of people expected them to be a Super Bowl caliber team, and just injuries and bad luck, frankly, affected their season. I don't see that happening this year. I think they're going to hit the ground running and be a real team to beat. And I think to help with that, they're going to draft edge rusher out of Tennessee, one of my favorite prospects in this entire draft again. I think if you ask somebody about where he would be drafted earlier last season, people would have said he would have gone higher, but I still think he's going to be a great player. James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher out of Tennessee, I think will be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer at number 19. Coming in at number 20, the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix had an incredible rookie year. One of my favorite quarterbacks I've seen come into this league in a while, and it just so happens he came into the league with another one of my favorite quarterbacks I've seen come into this league, Jaden Daniels. Bo had an incredible rookie season, threw 29 touchdowns, which nearly broke the record for touchdown passes by a rookie quarterback. He was just a few off of Justin Herbert's 2020 campaign. The Broncos have a few good weapons. Cortland Sutton especially is a monster. But I think you got to think that they're going to be looking to, honestly just give Bo Nix another weapon. Why not look any further than to get a fast blazer, Luther Burden out of Missouri? I think he'd be a great target for Bo Nix. They don't need a wide receiver. I think there's other positions you could maybe argue that they could fill. Maybe if you want to get really daring, you could reach for a running back at Cam Scatabo. If you want to give him a running back. But I'm going to say it's going to be Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri. Coming in at 21, my Pittsburgh Steelers, my favorite team. We've honestly got a pretty stacked roster if you just look down the list. 2 wide receivers now with DK Metcalf signing. You got him and George Pickens. You've got a star tight end, Pat Freiermuth. You've got a great young offensive line with stars throughout the board. You've got an aging but still very talented defense, a great secondary with, especially with the addition of Darius Slay. We need a quarterback. We've needed a quarterback ever since Ben Roethlisberger retired. A lot of people have tabbed the Steelers to get Aaron Rodgers. If he doesn't retire, a lot of people think Pittsburgh's the landing spot for him. And while I do think that will be the case, I think we also need to draft a rookie quarterback on top of that to sit under Rodgers. You can't play around with this like the Steelers kind of have. They drafted Kenny Pickett, the hometown guy, and he was terrible. Terrible quarterback. He's technically a Super Bowl champion now as the backup to the Eagles. But, yeah, the Steelers need a quarterback. I think we're going to draft Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss. I love Jackson Dart. I could go on and on about Jackson Dart. I don't think he's the best quarterback in this draft. Obviously, I think Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are a little better. But, I think when you talk about big boomer bust potential, Jackson Dart is the definition of that. He was very inconsistent down the stretch last season in college, but this is a quarterback I think is capable of being an absolute star in the league, or a bust. But I'm hoping, as a Steelers fan, I hope we get him, and I hope he turns into a star. Jackson Dart, number 21 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, quarterback out of Mississippi. 22. I believe the Los Angeles Chargers need to bolster their defense a little more. They lost Joey Bosa in free agency. That was a big loss. The offense, I think a lot of people expect them to take an offensive piece here, but, their offensive line's getting better. You're seeing wide receivers, rather than drafting and signing guys, you're just seeing guys kind of develop into the roles, like Ladd McConkey becoming a certified star number 1 wide receiver last year as a rookie. Quentin Johnston kind of coming into his own under Jim Harbaugh. I see the Chargers going defense. Kenneth Grant, defensive lineman out of Michigan. He played opposite Mason Graham, who is obviously a star player for Michigan in his own right. I think Kenneth Grant will be a great signing for them, help get pressure, especially you got a division now that's got, Patrick Mahomes and Bo Nix in it. You're going to need to create pressure in some way, shape, or form. And I think the Chargers are going to do that by drafting Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. Coming in at 23, the Green Bay Packers had a disappointing end to last year. They were great for the start of the year, and it looked like we were going to see 3 very highly seeded NFC North teams, but the Packers slowly started to slide as they got more and more injured down the stretch, eventually falling all the way to the 7th seed in the playoffs. They did slip into the playoffs, however, but did not go very far. I think they're going to draft Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. you've got decent wide receivers. Jaden Reed, for example, has had some great performances for Green Bay, but I think you really need to focus on getting that certified star number one wide receiver, and I think that's going to be Emeka Egbuka for Ohio State. The Minnesota Vikings coming up at 24. They had a very disappointing end to last season with, I think they had Super Bowl aspirations. You finished 14-3. Great year from Sam Darnold. A lot of people expected them to go further, including themselves. That did not happen. I think they've lost a few players. Cameron Bynum, the safety, the biggest loss in free agency. I think they're going to immediately replace him. They're going to go Malachi Stark, safety out of Georgia. Need to rebolster the secondary. I think if you see J.J. McCarthy pan out like they're hoping he will, this won't be so much a rebuild as it will be a reload. I think the Vikings are still very much in the thick of things, but if J.J. McCarthy doesn't pan out, that's a whole different story. Number 25, the Houston Texans, I think, are going to draft a wide receiver, not out of desire, but out of necessity. They lost Stephon Diggs in free agency, and unfortunately for them, they've had numerous injuries at wide receiver, Tank Dell being the biggest one, his gruesome knee injury at the end of last season against the Chiefs. I think they're going to keep the wide receiver Matthew Golden out of Texas. They're going to keep him in state. They're going to draft him to the Texans, and he'll be a new weapon for C.J. Stroud. I think they need to really focus on that, getting Stroud some new weapons right away, and that's no better way to do it than getting the Texas boy. Coming in at number 26, the Los Angeles Rams. For 8 years in a row, they traded their first-round pick and didn't make the selection, instead opting to trade it for pieces in free agency. I think for the second year in a row, they drafted Jared Verse in the first round last year. He panned out, major star player, defensive rookie of the year. I think they're going to make their first-round pick again at number 26. I think they're going to draft Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan. The Rams haven't had a star tight end in multiple years at this point, and I think, very rarely do you see two tight ends go in the first round of the draft, but we're in a year that definitely justifies it this year. Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State, is great, and so is Colston Loveland out of Michigan. I think he's going to be the Rams selection, get Matthew Stafford in probably the last few years of his career, get him a big target to throw to. Number 27, the Baltimore Ravens. They can do just about anything here. They've got a loaded roster, and they're looking to bolster it. And, pretty much my entire life, the Ravens have been a defensive-minded, defensive-focused team, or at the very least have had a hard-hitting defense. They had one of the best offenses in the league last year. Don't get me wrong, Lamar Jackson is a star. But I believe they're going to draft Mykel Williams, edge rusher out of Georgia, to just kind of bolster their pass rush. Not much to really say other than that. They're a team that can afford to just kind of reload rather than rebuild once again. Number 28, the Detroit Lions. This is an important year for the Lions. It's a bit of a prove-it year for Dan Campbell. He lost both of his coordinators in the signing period for head coaches. Aaron Glenn signing with the Jets to be their head coach. Ben Johnson signing with the Bears to be their head coach. So he's looking to kind of prove his worth as a head coach in his own right this year. And, the Lions' defense, when healthy, was great last year, but unfortunately they got completely stricken by injuries. And it definitely was noticeable down the stretch, giving up, many points in games against the Bills. In the playoffs, we saw them give up a bunch of points to the Commanders, and then what ultimately was a losing effort for them. I think they're going to draft Walter Nolan, defensive lineman out of Ole Miss, to kind of bolster their defense. I think with all their players healthy on defense, they're going to be still really good next year on defense, but you can never, there's never any harm in bolstering your defense, and I think they're going to do just that. Speaking of bolstering your defense, the Washington Commanders, the team that beat the Lions in the playoffs last year, I think they're going to draft an edge rusher of their own. They've got a few really good interior defensive linemen. Jonathan Allen is a big example, Deron Payne, but I think we're going to see them draft edge rusher Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M to make an immediate impact right away. They've got guys that can stop the run, but I think you really need to get into the backfield and start sacking the quarterback. Eagles have an incredible offensive line. You need to find ways to get to Jalen Hurts. You need to find ways to get to Dak Prescott, and you're going to need to find a way to get past the Giants' offensive line if they do draft the tackle that I think they should draft. And what better way to do that than Shamar Stewart, edge rusher out of Texas A&M, at number 29 for the Washington Commanders. Number 30, the Buffalo Bills had a heartbreaking defeat at the hands of the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship, and they're just looking to reload like everybody else. You know, they've signed Joey Bosa at pass rush in free agency, and that was a huge signing. He's going to make an immediate impact for them. Potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate, if you ask me. I think they're going to keep adding to their defense. This time in the linebackers core, I think they're going to draft Jalon Walker, linebacker out of Georgia, just to kind of fill a need. You know, they haven't had great linebackers these last few years. They've had incredible corners, some of the best cornerbacks in football. They've had great safety play, especially from Damar Hamlin. He's, you know, after the great story that was him coming back to the field after his, cardiac arrest event on the field, I think a lot of people just kind of were happy to see him playing, but now he's playing like a star player. So you really need to figure out linebacker. You know, Matt Milano could always use somebody good playing opposite him. He's getting up there in age. So Jalon Walker, linebacker out of Georgia, I think is the move here. Coming in at number 31, the Kansas City Chiefs suffered an embarrassing Super Bowl loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. That much is clear. That much is widely televised in front of all of America. To remedy that, the story of that game was the pass rush. The Eagles got to Patrick Mahomes 8 times. He took numerous hits. The offensive line just looked super out of whack, whether it was injuries or just bad play. You know, they've had consistently a great interior offensive line. They need to figure out the tackles situation. I think they do that with Gray Zabel, tackle out of North Dakota State. At least get one of the 2 tackles figured out. The rest will kind of fall into place good enough as the season goes on. But you can't go into the Super Bowl like you have last season, where both of your tackles are just frankly missing the mark and not playing very well. Finally, number 32, the final pick of the first round. I think the Philadelphia Eagles are going to bolster their pass rush as if they needed to. At this point, you know, the Eagles have a myriad of star players on defense in every phase of the ball. Frankly, a litany of star players on every position on the field. They've got great wide receivers, tight ends, offensive linemen, quarterbacks, running backs, pass rush, linebackers, safeties, cornerbacks, kickers, punters, you name it. The Philadelphia Eagles are absolutely loaded. They're going to draft, in my opinion, Nick Scourton, edge rusher out of Texas A&M. It's funny, their division rival, the Commanders, drafted the edge rusher Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M in my mock draft. I believe the Eagles are going to draft the edge rusher that played directly opposite him, Nick Scourton. And I think that's going to be a great pairing. You know, they've got so many star edge rushers. He might see some trouble at first seeing the field with how many great players they've got, but you know, they're just, in my opinion, they're going to stick to their bread and butter, and that's their pass rush and their offensive line. So if they don't go pass rush, I think they bolster their offensive line a little bit more. But I see them going pass rush here. I think it's going to be Nick Scourton, edge rusher out of Texas A&M. And with that, the first round mock draft is over. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a special mock draft edition of Off Your Gord. We're going to be coming at you live next week we got some more stories, more out of baseball, more out of hockey, with both the playoffs in hockey and basketball starting. We're going to talk about that. But this has been the mock draft edition of Off Your Gord. I am your host, Jeffrey Gordon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Off Your Gord. Thank you for watching.